What is the correct name of the building? When did it start being labelled as the Bhojshala? Was there ever a temple in place of the mosque that stands there? The seed of bad scholarship often grows a lot quicker than the seeds of good scholarship. Lele ji was a creative genius. I do fall sick, you guys, as incredulous as that may sound. Indologists. A couple of weeks. More factual inaccuracies in this one line than there were in Prithviraj, the entire movie. The mystery deepens. Raja Bhojka Madrasa. Lay off me, people. I'm a human. Hello, and welcome to the 15th episode of Eyeshadow and Etihaas. I am Ruchika Sharma, and in case you are new here, then Eyeshadow and Etihaas is a passion project wherein I bring a topic of Etihaas which is history, and while talking about that particular topic, I create an eye look like this one that I created today. And if this is something that really interests you, please do consider subscribing to the channel. And as for me, I am Ruchika Sharma and I teach history for a living. I do have a few more credentials that have been listed in the description box. Also in the description box are a list of sources on today's topic, which you can go ahead and read if whatever I say here sparks your curiosity on the subject, or in case you want to fact check everything that I blabber over here, which is also fine. And before I go ahead and introduce you to the topic, I must say my mea culpas. I have been a bit MIA, which is missing in action, in case you didn't know, for a couple of weeks, at least for the long form videos. But I have made a few shots, which hopefully you've seen. And the reason for this was that I wasn't really well. I do fall sick, you guys, as incredulous as that may sound. That does happen to me. In fact, I am still a bit under the weather, but I really couldn't wait to come back and create a long form on my particularly favorite place in the subcontinent, primarily because my PhD thesis is going to be on this particular place, which is Malwa, particularly Mandu. Today, we will be talking about Dhar, which is pretty close to Mandu. And in Dhar is a complex which is known as Bhojshala today and is popularly understood to be Raja Bhoja's school attached to the worship of goddess Saraswati. However, there are more factual inaccuracies in this one line than there were in Prithviraj, the entire movie, which in case if you have not seen, I will link it over here, just so that you can understand the gravity of how incorrect this particular statement is. And I will be bringing these inaccuracies to light by answering three main questions. First, what was the name, or what is the correct name of the building? When did it start being labelled as the Bhojshala? And was there ever a temple in place of the mosque that stands there? All of this while doing this black and white eye look. So, chale phir. So the first question, what is the name of the building? The short answer is, the name of the building is Kamal Maula's mosque, while the long answer starts from 1822 AD, when the first English survey was conducted by John Malcolm, who in his report mentions many legends about Raja Bhoja, but makes no mention of him ever building or being associated with a shala, which, by the way, is not the Sanskrit name for a school. Shala just in Sanskrit means an apartment or a room or a house. What John Malcolm does mention in his survey are the dams that King Bhoja once vowed to make in order to catch the flow of 9 rivers and 99 rivulets and so on and so forth, which makes sense since it was the Paramars who held sway over Dhar since 10th century all the way up to 12th century AD, before their rule was cut short by Alauddin Khilji's forces. So Malcolm doesn't mention the Bhojshala, but he does mention the building in question, and he refers to it as a ruined mosque with a mimbar, which is basically a pulpit, and in this case is approached by a set of stairs. And it is on the floor of this mimbar or pulpit that Malcolm reports having found what he calls a Hindu inscription, indicating that the mosque was primarily built out of reused material. So the next mention of the building is in the next report on Dhar and Mandu, where Mandu is the capital or was the capital of the Malwa Sultanate, right? And the report is by William Kincaid, who calls himself as the Bombay Subaltern or a Bombay Subaltern, whose work in 1844 AD describes the building as a small mosque close to the Roza of a Pir Kamaluddin. And Roza is basically the Arabic word for tomb or paradise garden. That Kincaid is quite right in his identification of the tomb and mosque complex is borne by translations of the inscriptions on these buildings, which were first published in the 1909-1910 AD edition of the Epigraphia Indo-Muslimica, where Zafar Hassan translated the Farsi inscription on the tomb and the mosque. Now, the tomb inscription identifies it as the Roza of Qutub Kamal, which was repaired by Mahmud Shah Khilji, who was the third ruler of the Malwa Sultanate. The other inscription, and this one is on the mosque, identifies Dilawar Khan Khuri, the governor of Dhar, under King Mahmud Shah of Delhi, as the one who repaired the mosque in 1392-93 AD. So this makes the tomb certainly older than 1392 AD, and Michael Willis, in his paper on the Bhojshala, is of the opinion that the mosque was built after Ainul Mulk Multani, who was the governor of the Delhi Sultan Alauddin Khilji, conquered Dhar in 1305 AD, and this served as the first Jama Masjid of Dhar. Thus, the complex's name is correctly Kamal Maula's complex, which consists of Kamal Maula's tomb and the mosque next to it. Maula is the localized form of the appellation Malavi, since the name of the Sufi saint buried here is mentioned in Gulzar-e Abrar, a Persian work on the Sufis of the subcontinent, as Kamaluddin Malavi, where Malavi is a toponym, which is basically a name which signifies the place that you're from or you're associated with. And since Kamal Maula was associated with Malwa and lived in Malwa for quite some time and also died in Malwa, he was called as Kamaluddin Malavi, and therefore the toponym means of Malwa, Kamaluddin of Malwa. So far then we know that the complex is a tomb and mosque complex. Sorry, I haven't washed my brushes in a couple of weeks. I'm again going to blame it on the sickness. Just lay off me, people. I'm a human. Coming back to the point and excusing this particular blunder over here, the point is that so far we know that this was a tomb and mosque complex, and that it was called as the Kamal Maula complex, and there was no mention of these buildings being associated with King Bhoj, at least till the first half of the 19th century. But who exactly is Kamaluddin Malavi? Kamaluddin Malavi was a Chishti Sufi saint and a murid of Nizamuddin Aulia, Now, murid basically is a disciple. So he's a disciple of Nizamuddin Aulia and was sent by Aulia to Dhar in 1293 AD. The mosque next to Malvi's tomb, which is the building in question, what is today called as Bhojshala, is what is called as a hypostyle mosque, which is basically a large courtyard with rows of columns or pillars. And as is customary in the mosques, to the west is the mihrab, and to the left of the mihrab is a mimbar, which, as we discussed, is a pulpit approached by a set of stairs. And the mosque is largely made out of reused material. So, if the complex is a mosque and tomb complex and was not referred to as the Bhojshala till a major part of the 19th century, how did the name exactly come about? And more specifically, when did the name come about? Now, the short answer for this is 1903 AD. And before I give you the long answer, can we just take a moment to appreciate the amazing blending which has happened over here? My God, the grey and the white have just... I love it. Coming back to the point, the long answer is that after these two reports, epigraphic surveys were held in Dhar. First patronized by Sanskritist and physician Bhau Lad, he sent his people to take stampages of the inscriptions at Dhar in 1871 AD, but Bhaudaji's death in 1874 AD meant that nothing was done about this. Bhaudaji is, by the way, honored in Bombay with the Bhaudaji Lad Museum, which, in case you haven't seen, is a gorgeous place. And the museum was actually inaugurated in 1872 AD and was called as the Victoria Albert Museum, but it was renamed to honor Bhaudaji, and the museum is known for its excellent Bidri work collection. And I visited this absolutely stunning museum in February 2017, I think, and it was everything. Like, not just the collection that they have, but the architecture, the interior of the museum itself is just to die for. But back to the topic at hand. The next in line was a person called George Buller, who was an Indologist and who never really visited Dhar. But the 1908 Gazetteer credits him as having contributed quite a bit to Dhar's epigraphical history. Buller wrote a lot about King Bhoj, his love, that is King Bhoj's love for literature as well as architecture, but never mentions any association of Bhoj with a school, and the Bhojshala is absent here as well. Now, Buller may have not really visited Dhar himself, but Buller's pupil, Alois Anton Führer, did indeed visit Dhar. And he wrote a report in 1893 where he very interestingly recognized Kamal Maula's mosque having reused inscriptions which he identified as grammatical sutras, probably a part of a scholastic building. How did Führer come to this conclusion? It's completely unknown. What we do know, in fact, is that just 5 years after this report came out, Führer was regarded as a fluke, and in 1898 was forced to resign from the Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI, when Winston Smith, another surveyor and historian, conducted an inquiry into all the studies that Führer had so far undertaken and found them to be bad scholarship. Indologists. Yet, the damage was done. You see, the seed of bad scholarship often grows a lot quicker than the seeds of good scholarship. And that's exactly what happened here. But even here, even in Führer's absolutely fake fluke report, Bhoj isn't related to the mosque in any shape or form, and the name Bhojshala also appears nowhere in Führer's report. The mystery deepens. The person who was influenced by Führer and quite heavily influenced by Führer was K.K. Lele, who was put in charge of the spur of research in Dhar, which started since Curzon was going to visit Dhar in 1902 AD. Much of Lele's research went into Ernst Barnes' report, which was published in 1902, and this is where Barnes calls the mosque as Raja Bhoj ka Madrasa, which literally means Raja Bhoj's school. And Barnes, as you may have guessed it, in his report, the 1902 report, credits Lele for the information, and Lele's information largely came for just studying 2 serpentine inscriptions which were reused in the mosque, and had come to the conclusion that this, which is Lele, had come to the conclusion that this was Raja Bhoj ka Madrasa, or Raja Bhoj's school. However, what's funny is that even in this report, which is based on nothing and yet has come to the conclusion that this is Raja Bhoj's Madrasa, the exact term Bhojshala is still not to be found anywhere in the 1902 report. This is turning out to be a really scintillating crime story. I don't know what's going to happen next. So after Curzon's visit, the much awaited visit, for which there was this spur of activity, research activity at Dhar, K.K. Lele in 1903 published a report titled very interestingly as the summary of the dramatic inscription found at the Bhojshala, in brackets, Kamal Maula Mosque, Dhar. Why is the inscription dramatic? We don't know. And this, ladies and gentlemen, was the first time the term Bhojshala was ever used for the Kamal Maula Mosque, which is fascinating considering, as we already discussed, the word Shala does not mean a school. It is actually the word Vidyalaya or Gyanpeeth in Sanskrit, which is often used for school or a place where you go to learn. So the name in itself is a curious one, and clearly was one of Lele's own ingenious inventions. Please note that the inscriptions which were studied by Lele also do not mention Bhojshala. This term is not there in any of the inscriptions that Lele studied. So he clearly came up with this name on his own. Lele ji was a creative genius. Lele's report was widely circulated, yet thankfully there were a few naysayers in the English group of surveyors who didn't really see eye to eye with Lele's views. And one such person was C.E. Luard, who in 1908 regarded the Bhojshala as a misnomer. Yet Luard, in the same report, goes ahead and says that the mosque stands at the site of an old temple, which is interesting since he cites nothing for this. No excavation, no textual evidence. Which brings us to the last question: was there ever a temple in place of the mosque and tomb complex, or in the premises of the mosque and tomb complex? Short answer, we don't know. Long answer leads us a little further to the British Museum, where K.N. Dixit, who was the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, spotted a sculpture that he recognized to be the Saraswati of Bhoja at Dhar. What? How? Michael Wheelis informs us that there is an inscription on that sculpture, by the way, which clearly mentions that the sculpture is that of a Jain goddess called Ambika, and it was made by Vara Ruchi under the aegis of Bhoja. It is not Saraswati. But even here, there is no evidence to tie the sculpture to Dhar, or more specifically to the mosque in question. Yet the belief based on really shoddy scholarship has persisted. No marks for guessing that. And it is often claimed that the mosque is an example of wholesale reuse of a Saraswati temple, which is thoroughly incorrect, since the architecture clearly shows the mosque is made from scratch using older material. Where did this material come from? Unfortunately, there is no telling. As explained in a previous video, it is quite difficult to know whether such material belonged to a palace or a temple, or was perhaps a mix of both. What we do know thus far is that the correct name of the mosque is Kamal Maula's mosque or Kamal Maula's mosque, and that Bhojshala is in fact a misnomer which was first invented in 1903 AD by K.K. Lele. And that the term Bhojshala is not mentioned in any Sanskrit text, nor is Bhoja associated with any kind of a Sanskrit school, which is what the Bhojshala is often understood to be. And while the name itself, which is Bhojshala, came in 1903, its association with Saraswati came in much later, from 1924 onwards, and is not based on any kind of evidence. Lastly, if it is the plethora of material reused to construct the mosque in question, then that in itself is a good question, since reuse in itself is an interesting phenomenon. But the method of reusing older material isn't unique to the Kamal Maula Mosque. In fact, there are numerous examples which prove that the practice of reusing older material to make new buildings actually predated the Kamal Maula Mosque. Do check out this playlist to know about more such examples. And that is all that I have for you today. Please note that there is a list of sources on today's topic, a pretty long list of sources considering we spoke about many colonial surveys, which has been put in the description box, which you can go ahead and read to fact check everything that I blabbered over here, or just to do a bit of extra reading if whatever I said here sparked your curiosity on the subject. And before you just walk away, please like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. And do let me know in the comment section what is it that you would like me to talk about in the next episode of Eyeshadow and Etihaas.